Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story. It's May the 29th. Another one of those milestone days, I guess. 150. Yay, party. And I almost would say it's hard to believe we've done 150 podcasts. Alyssa probably can say she believes.
Yeah.
We've actually recorded 151.
Oh, yeah.
Because we had one we had to redo.
Yeah. and you have more duty than the rest of us because you are in some of them. Plus, you have to edit all of them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Thank you, Alyssa.
yes, thank you.
Snaps for Alyssa. If you're listening to the podcast, snaps for Alyssa. Thank you.
Yeah, she's all rigging. Or she thinks you're stupid. One of the two.
Probably the second.
So this is David is close to death. It's time for a new king. Adonijah or Adonijah, I don't know how you say it. Adonijah, maybe.
Adonijah?
Adonijah. So
Yeah, that's the way I've heard it too.
Adonijah.
Yeah.
Okay. Whose mother was Haggith, began boasting, "I will make myself king." So he provided himself with chariots and charioteers and recruited 50 men to run in front of him. Now his father, King David, had never disciplined him at any time, even by asking, "Why are you doing that?" Adonijah had been born next after Absalom, and he was very handsome. So over the last weeks, I've had opportunities to play out my theory, right or wrong, that one of David's greatest weaknesses had to do with his family. Saul, Amnon, Absalom, Tamar, now Adonijah. And it says here what it appears to be. I mean, it says clearly what I've been saying all. He just did not discipline him ever, it says.
I really like the second part, even by asking, "Why are you doing that?" I asked my 6-year-old,
Why are you doing that?
Why are you doing that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You may not discipline him, but at least you question,
Come on now.
have you thought through that?
Jeez
Right?
Louise, yeah.
He hadn't even asked him, have you thought through this? Never, it says. It never had.
Yeah.
I don't really want to talk about whether this was David's weakness or not, or whether he should have killed Saul or whatever. That's gone. What I do want to talk about is, are there some lessons we can learn about the consequences David suffered for not dealing with his children?
Oh, yeah. I mean, not disciplining your kids when they're young or even talking with them, like it sounds here, like even asking him some of these, like,
Getting them to think.
yeah, basic questions just to get him to think through what his own actions. Like, if we're not willing to even go that far with our own kids, it can have lasting consequences, not just for our own lives, but their lives, which they could hurt their own lives and the lives of other people around them as well. So it's important that we play we should play a pretty critical role in our kids' development. And I think and discipline is part of that. I think you have to, even at the minimal level, ask them and getting them to think, like, why are you doing these things?
Well, the reference Bible of Google tells me that David had 21 kids. And I think when you start to get to really high numbers of kids, it gets really hard. And I think that there has to be a lot more intentionality given to it if you're going to have that many children. And obviously David had some other things going on in his life. He was the king, and so he didn't have the time to spend with him. And I think time is something that his $1 billion of gold couldn't buy.
Yeah. And, we're going to see in the story Solomon's going to become king. And Chronicles tells us Solomon was supposed to be king. That David, it was clear Solomon said he was supposed to be king. Solomon, I'm making some assertions here that are going to be difficult to back up, but I'm going to do it anyway. Solomon turns out pretty good. Haggith, if that's how you say her name, Hagith, I don't know what's a better way to say it. I'm just introduced to her here. Like she's not the if you ask me David's wives' names, I can name 3 of them. Michal, who would have been Saul's daughter, Abigail, who would have been Nabal's wife, and Bathsheba. He clearly loved Bathsheba. I wonder, did the relationship that he had because Bathsheba was going to be Solomon's mom, did that have an impact on how the kids turned out? Do you think? Is Adonijah acting out because his dad has not paid enough attention to him? I don't know. We can read a lot into this that I see play out in real life.
It could certainly be, because we do see this happen in other places in the Bible with like Rachel and Leah, and how Rachel, her son, was the one who was favored above all the others. And so I don't think it's too much of a stretch to guess that could definitely be a possibility, that the wife you talk the most about or that you seem to favor the most, their son is the one you're going to favor the most. Because it wasn't his firstborn son. Abijah is older than Solomon, from what we understand. I think from here, that's because Solomon was still young at the time, I think, from what they say. Do we know how old Solomon was when he became king?
We probably could find that out.
Probably Google it.
Yeah, I'm too lazy. So.
I think Adonijah, they said he's the next born after Absalom. So I think that makes him the oldest living son. Is that correct?
Probably, yeah, because it would be Amnon.
And then Absalom. And then Adonijah, or
so it would have been
Donnie for short.
Yeah.
So I think that he just assumed, and he saw his father was weak. We're given some details about how weak David is in the first section of this chapter, and so he knows that he could take it.
Yeah, and maybe you guys have some insight on this. I've heard over years, this isn't just something recent, but over years, that some of the biggest challenges for children's workers and youth leaders are homes where they're absentee fathers, where the father's not present. The impact that it had on the kids, and they're a little bit more challenging, disruptive. Obviously we see the role that plays. Maybe David's. You mentioned earlier, David didn't have time for him. Time is critical in development of children, and how they turn out. Who knows? It's for me the fascinating thing is that he had never disciplined him, not even question, what are you doing? So it goes on to say, in verses 6 and following, now his father, King David, 7 and following, it says, Adonijah took Joab, son of Zeruiah, and Abiathar the priest into his confidence, and they agreed to help him become king. But Zadok the priest, Benaiah son of Jehoiada, and Nathan the prophet, Shimei, Reah, and David's personal bodyguard refused to support Adonijah. Immediately you have a division in leadership. David has said Solomon, at least the way I can read it, David has previously said Solomon's going to be king.
I don't know if that's clear.
I know. I don't know that it is clear, but it seems to be clear.
Right. I read like a semi-scholarly article that was like Bathsheba the Kingmaker, where this is like Bathsheba's turn to she has learned how political power works, and she comes in and she kind of makes him king by suggesting this, and then...
Well, Nathan's the instigator.
Right.
In the story, because Nathan, let's see if we can put our eyeballs on it. It says Nathan went to Bathsheba and says, haven't you heard? If you want to save your own life and the life of your son Solomon, follow my advice. So Nathan becomes the instigator to Bathsheba going before him. But I think he goes to Bathsheba either because he believes Solomon is truly the next one, or he recognizes David's relationship with Bathsheba. I think David has a significant relationship with Bathsheba. But anyway,
I also think too, didn't God said that Solomon would be the next? Was it God that said that or no? Now I'm blanking.
well, so in the previous story that we would have read, David says it's clear that Solomon should be the king, when he's collecting the
Yes, yeah.
stuff for the temple. What order that happens in is kind of hard for us to,
complicated.
We were, a week ago was David's last words, and he's still hanging
he's still,
on.
he's still giving us words.
Enough
But
words, David.
Could
enough
this
words.
have changed had David stepped in earlier? Could David have stopped if he had paid attention? He does set it up and change it, but the leadership gets divided. If David had stepped in, he could have kept some continuity here.
He could have prevented a lot of conflict. Thing with it doesn't sound like from the rest of the story. It doesn't sound like it gets too terribly bad.
No, and we're going to talk about
which
that
is
as we get to the end.
But it wouldn't have even started in the first place if he had just been a bit more proactive.
Yeah,
He was hanging on to power. He was so weak that it seems like he couldn't leave his bedroom.
Right.
And yet he didn't take that step to be like, you know what? I think my time is done. I need to change leadership. I mean, we see a much more proactive King David with change of leadership in Chronicles.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what
here we see somebody
Right.
that to their last breath is taking, a hold.
Right.
And I see that way too often. Like I've seen it in churches. I've seen pastors preach until they have nothing left to give.
They have an IV in their arm in a bed on the stage as they're preaching. It's crazy.
Well, I haven't seen it that way. But, and the church dies around them, and then there's nothing left for the next person. Verse 11 through 13. So we talked about Nathan goes to Bathsheba, and he says, "You go in and talk to David. I'm going to come in behind you. I'm going to confirm it." That's kind of what happens. She goes in. She talks to David, and then he comes in and says, "Yes, the Lord said the same thing." So Nathan is the instigator here. What's the value of level-headed advisors like Nathan or Bathsheba in your life?
I think we always need to be surrounded by people who are smarter than us. I think there's a saying that you should not be, like, if you're a leader, you should not be the smartest person at the table. Or I think not saying that you should be a dummy, but I think that surround yourself with people who are gifted in other areas, who have wisdom, who have experience that you don't have, because that'll help you a lot in life, but also to spiritually and making these decisions that are tied to what God wants for the people of Israel. These are pretty big decisions you've got to make, and so it's important to have people that you trust, but also people that are good in the fields that they're in.
Alyssa?
Yeah, I mean, there can never be enough wisdom, and with multiple advisors and viewpoints and things that just helps any organization be stronger and helps you see different points of view that you wouldn't see.
And sometimes you need people to nudge you off of. It's easy to become complacent. Privately, y'all have heard me talk recently about how easy it is to push the cruise button for people and just, cash it in until the end. And I think that's what David's doing here. He's kind of hit the cruise control. I'm going to hold on to the throne as long as I can. And he's not doing smart things. And somebody had to come into the room and say, "Hey, you got to do something here, different." So he puts Solomon on his throne, puts him on his donkey for a parade. He basically lends his influence so that he can succeed. Excuse me.
You know, we always are like, man, Jesus coming in on a donkey was weird that was a king. It was supposed to be a horse, and but it's a donkey. Like,
Right.
that's the same
Apparently
thing.
the
Like,
king had a donkey.
right. And so, I mean, I don't know the history of the domestication of horses, so maybe, a few hundred years later, but that caught me because that was kind of not the Sunday school line that I
That's
saw.
right. Yeah. Or they don't preach good.
But this is a mule. So it's half donkey, half horse, right? Is that what a mule is?
Where do you read that?
Mule. It's verse 33. Take Solomon and my officials down to Guyon's spring. Solomon is to ride on my own mule, right? Verse 33. NLT?
Yeah.
It's a mule. That's half a horse. That's at least a step better than a donkey. Come on now. You can't be riding it on a donkey. I'm just joking. But anyways.
But I would say a mule is closer to a donkey than a horse, like in a lot of the looks.
That is true.
So.
And I think too, it's I guess, you know what? It's a nice medium because a horse is regal, but a donkey is humble. It's right in the middle. It's like he is to be respected, but also he'll be a humble king.
He's rumble.
Yeah, he's rumble.
That was his dad. That was Rumble. That was his dad. That was Rumble.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, has anybody in your life ever used their influence to help you improve your situation? So I'll give you a personal example, and then maybe it'll help trigger something in you. When I went to pastor my first church, we got ready to build a building, and there was an old gentleman. He passed away a couple of years ago. He was retired. He was a retired pastor, but he was also a retired businessman. He owned a big farm there. He put me in his car. We rode around the community together. He introduced me to people that didn't come to the church. Told them what I was going to do, and told them what he said was, "Here, I'm here with him. You need to listen to what he's going to say, what the church is going to do, and we want you to help." And that's all he would say. And then I would make the presentation, and people gave. But they didn't give because they knew me, because I was just some young 28, 30-year-old kid that they didn't know. I was leaning on his reputation, his influence. So he gave me, what I always said was, he loaned me his influence so that I could be successful. Can you ever think of a time where somebody did that for you in your life?
I did the opposite.
Okay.
Where someone like hurt, like they spoke poorly of me, and then like not like just being like, and then I spoke, and then it was hurt. You know, like it was impacted. I was like, wow, like things went a lot worse than I expected, and I found out only later that it was because the person spoke poorly of me to the people before I got there.
Alyssa?
When we were in Cleveland getting ready to start an art gallery, the person we were working with, his name was Steve as well, and he had a lot of connections, and that project took off because of him, but he took Tyler and I along, and we started an art gallery and a ministry and in Cleveland, and his influence really was what made that work.
And you got to benefit from that.
Right.
Yeah. So the people start rejoicing. They have this big parade, as he's going down the street on the mule, donkey, whatever, horse. Mm-hmm. And Adonijah is having this meal that he's the king, and he's invited all these guests, and they hear the parade, and it says they all scatter. I mean, they run. Yeah. Why is loyalty so tenuous with most people?
I think in their specific situation, they were loyal because they thought by being at this party, we're going to be on top. We're going to be the future generals. We're going to be the future leaders of this entire nation by sticking around with him. But then when that switch flips to, we're criminals now. Like we're gonna get like beheaded, because of like if we get caught like they're gonna think we're trying to start like a coup. I think there is a very good reason why they realized we can't. They were gonna be true to him if it was to benefit them. If it's gonna lead to their death, they're not gonna go against King David and now the future King Solomon. So I think they made the right decision by turning tail, and running. But yeah,
that is a very kind of
funny
picture of like the fear. Like they're just like sitting there and they're like, "Hey, what's that music?"
Yeah.
Oh, and they just start like, and like the chairs go flying, and like, I mean, it was just fear. I mean, I don't know if it was even loyalty, if they were like, do I need to stay here and fight? Because it wasn't going to be a fight. Like they just, it was a weak connection they had with him. It wasn't.
They were only there for the influence.
Mm-hmm.
So
they were there for the food.
Right. I knew a gentleman in a town my dad used to pastor. He was an accountant and a county commissioner. And I was in his office one day asking him some questions about something else. And in the conversation, I remember him telling me, he said, ever who the Democratic and Republican governor candidates are, I write a check for the maximum amount to both of them every time. And I was like, well, that's strange. And like, do you not care who wins? He says, no, not really. He said, all I want is to have influence with that person. I want to be able to ask a favor. So
in high school, I was a little bit into the political scene, and on election night, me and one of my friends were at one of the parties, one of the
Candidates.
two parties, and we were at a candidate party. And then we went over to the second like the other party, and made an appearance. And like, oh yeah, and like that was my friend. That was the one being the political person, just playing both sides. And he has made it in politics as a
oh yeah,
yeah, as like
an aide.
No, the people who go to like lobbyists and like that kind of stuff.
Well, those people have lots of influence.
Yeah.
So that's how I view these people. They're like, oh, this isn't the guy that's going to be able to do me the favor. Let's go to the other guy.
There's a parade going on.
It's like it's kind of like you're in the room and you think your candidate's going to win, and like, oh no, they didn't. So let me go. And so Adonijah, then he fears for his life. And he runs. This was interesting for me, okay? So I think I even made it in the notes somewhere when I was reading this. But toward the end, it said he runs to the temple and he seizes the horns of the altar. Mm-hmm. Have either of you ever heard that expression outside of this?
No.
You haven't?
I hadn't.
Alyssa, in a Pentecostal environment, you have to have heard that.
No, not really. I mean...
What is it? What?
This was a late addition to what we're talking about, so I'm Googling. I mean, they talk about him in Amos and stuff. Go. What do you have?
But I mean, I've heard people use, that to mean they got down to business with God. He got a hold of the horns of the altar. You've never heard that expression?
No.
Really?
Maybe.
No.
Yeah, so maybe I would think you probably had. I wouldn't expect to have ever heard.
Yeah.
This
is the first time I heard
Your denomination didn't pray.
No, they didn't pray. They just
the horns of the altar. I don't know. I didn't even know what that was.
But multiple times I can think about hearing people say, he got a hold of the horns of the altar. And I knew what they meant, that he was praying sincerely, he was pleading his case.
Yeah.
I knew what they meant when they said it, but I didn't know the context of where it was. And clearly here, that's what he's doing. He's pleading his case before God, please spare me. Don't let me die. He's
pleading.
He's into
Sometimes just gotta grab the altar by the horns.
It's pleading sanctuary. I mean,
right.
I think that they do that in like the Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yeah, sanctuary. Yes.
Yes.
Give me safety.
Right.
Protect me.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, it was a prayer of desperation.
Yeah.
That's kind of how when I think about getting a hold of the horns of the altar. Now, I'm glad to have it in context.
Yeah.
And it sounds funny to you, but in context for me, like I can remember hearing this numerous times. And here we have somebody who's desperate, who is, you use the terminology, pleading sanctuary, pleading for mercy, pleading for help. Somebody please intervene here. And I don't know. I was just glad.
I mean, I think it seems like, from like a quick little thing, it seems like this is where that idea comes from.
Yeah.
Like that there's no, like in Amos they talk about the horns shall be cut off and fall to the ground in judgment, but like there's not too many places that it talks about.
Come from,
yeah, it's not, it wasn't, like I was like wondering, like, is there like some sort of like law that was like if you grab the horn, like, no, I don't think that there's
I think he was just desperate, sincere,
Right.
pleading, you know. And Solomon lets him live.
for now.
Well, yeah. As long as he behaves, he's going to get to live. What does it say about Solomon?
He's just like his father. Psh, he can't.
Well, this is his older brother.
Yes, yeah. He's merciful.
I mean, I think, yeah, Solomon just has a different demeanor than David, and we'll get to know Solomon through these next days or weeks, however long that those portions of scripture take to read. But Solomon is a peaceful time overall. I mean, with David, it was always craziness.
Solomon is a thinker, not a fighter. David's a fighter.
And a lover.
Yeah.
Solomon.
He's something, apparently, yeah. So, any other things in this story that stick out to you guys?
Nope.
No. Well, let's close in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for things that we see in Scripture that maybe we've heard before that we didn't have a context for, and helping us understand them better. Thank you for lessons that we can learn even from people that we consider to be great, failures they may have had. And I pray that us as parents would take to heart some things that we could learn from David, both good and bad, things we should avoid and things we should take on. Help us, God, to surround ourselves with righteous people of influence to help us do the right thing at the right time, so that we don't become complacent and not follow through with the things we need to do. Help us to honor you in all that we do. In Jesus'